Hey there, internet friends. Trevor Starkey here, welcoming you to episode 8 of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. Joining me this week is another intimate two-person show. It's just me and Frank Mazzani. How you doing, Frank?
Pretty good, man. How are you doing tonight?
Doing all right. We tried to get Jazz Foster in here for her first appearance since our Austin episode, but we were running into technical difficulties before we started recording. We just couldn't get her audio set up and working through Discord. So she's gonna go off and try and troubleshoot that, and hopefully we'll get her on next week or sometime in the near future, because it'll be good to get her on one of these shows. Um, some housekeeping real quick. If you enjoy what you hear for That Nerdy Site Show, please remember you can like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast everywhere you are able. We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify. If you have rated us and reviewed us on one of those places, feel free to go and do the same on others. We're also on YouTube, and we're nearing 100 subscribers on YouTube, which would be great because then we can get like youtube.com/thatnerdysite. So if you haven't subscribed over there, please do, even if you don't listen to or watch any of the YouTube stuff. If you are feeling extra generous, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, just like Christian Williams did. Thank you, Christian, for the support. He's our newest Patreon supporter in this last week. So let's go ahead, Frank, you and we can just dive right in. I'll go ahead and kick us off this week. We're recording this Friday night, the day that Star Wars has gone out. I'm going to just put this out there right after we record this episode. We're going to do a dedicated spoiler cast and kind of review discussion for Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. So we're not going to talk about it here on this show necessarily, though both of us have watched it. But if you want to check that out. It's probably already a separate podcast on this feed, because I'm probably going to end up editing that together and getting that out before this episode actually goes live. So you can go check that out. But other than that, I want to dive in first to a couple things I've been playing, or one of the things I've been playing. I dove in the lead up to like end of the year, game of the year kind of conversation stuff. I was like, okay, there's a couple games that like got enough buzz this year that I'm gonna go ahead and dive in and try and play them a little bit, even though they exist well outside my comfort zone. And the first of those, I would say, is Resident Evil 2, the remake. I have never been a Resident Evil fan because I am not a horror person fan of those kinds of things. I don't like scary things. I don't like jump scares. They're incredibly tense for me. Do you ever play Resident Evil games, Frank? Is that in
Uh,
your
I,
wheelhouse?
I'm kind of in the similar boat to like where you are, and I definitely have played them, but I've honestly never sat in. Oh, actually, the only one I've played from beginning to end is seven. All the other ones I've like dabbled in. That's the only one I've beaten.
Okay. The that's the first person one, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of and it's funny because like that I actually really liked that, but it's so funny that like it's way different than like everything else. So it's funny that that's the one that I was like, oh, I love this. This is what Resident Evil should be to me.
Yeah, I dove into Resident Evil 2. I put out the like a tweet basically saying here are four like potential game of the year contender things that I want to maybe give some time to. What should I play? I don't even remember what all four of them were, but like Resident Evil 2 was on there, Sekiro was on there, Life is Strange 2, and yeah, I just don't even remember the fourth one.
I voted
Um,
for Sekiro.
Sekiro. Yeah, and I was like, I'm gonna regret putting this out there because it's probably gonna go one of the bad ways of Sekiro or Resident Evil 2. Um, and Life is Strange 2 like took an early lead in the poll, but then yeah, Resident Evil like just ended up kind of blowing it away. I was surprised people didn't kind of want me to recreate my Bloodborne nightmares from a couple years ago. But
That's what I was going for.
yeah, exactly. With Sekiro, but that's still another one. Like I have the game. I'm going to dive into it a little bit here in the next week or so to consider that as well. But so yeah, I dove into to Resident Evil 2 remake at the request of the audience, and I streamed it for a couple hours the other night, and uh, like was very surprised by how much I enjoyed that game when it wasn't scaring the shit out of me. Um, like the I know enough about that game to know that I should be expecting jump scares, and so I was trying to like keep myself I definitely was playing it in a very well lit apartment and not trying to like just keep myself like jovial and laughing and stuff. And so like when I'm walking down like a very dark corridor or something, I was cracking jokes and saying like, "Oh fuck you! I don't want. I know something bad is about to happen. I don't like this. Why are you going down this way?" Or like when I would turn a corner and like down at the very end of the hall, like the flashlight would just very faintly like have a zombie like in its crosshairs kind of thing. I was like, fuck that guy being at the end of the hall, just like he's a PT villain or something like that. Um, and then yeah, just like the gruesomeness and the goriness of it, I was constantly saying like, oh man, I wish this were PS1 graphics. Like I don't like how realistic a lot of this stuff looks. But so when I wasn't doing that, when it was the like when it's more the puzzle elements of that game and like oh you have to solve clues, you have to like figure out oh you've got to move forward you need to clearly put like a lever here, so you've got to go find that lever somewhere or something like that. Like I'm really enjoying those aspects of the game, and I'm definitely like I'm playing it on the assisted mode. I almost went and like paid the extra DLC for like a gun with unlimited ammo, I think.
Oh,
Which
I
I
didn't even know you could do that.
so
I thought you had
so
to like unlock that through gameplay because that's like a Resident Evil staple. Like
it
I didn't
is.
even know you could just buy that.
Yeah, you can still unlock it through gameplay, but for the sake of this, I guess they also said like, hey, if you don't want to unlock it through gameplay and you want to pay us an extra $5 or something like that, we'll let you do that, sure. So like you can buy like the unlock pack, I think it's even what it's called, that'll give you like that gun, it'll give you like the extra characters like the tofu character or whatever, the things you can get from unlocking the game by or from playing the game with certain criteria and stuff. It'll give you those things. I did not do that because I was like, no, I'll try and go for like the quote unquote authentic Resident Evil 2 experience, and I
As the
also
developer intended.
yeah, exactly. And then when it was like, do you want to play as Leon or do you want to play as Claire? I was like, I feel like I've heard enough things about this game that like Claire's the easier thing to play through on the first time, so I'm gonna try and do that. And I don't know if that was specific to this game or if I was like mixing up other Resident Evil games, but like I just heard in passing of like, oh yeah, no, if you play as so and so, you'll get like the lockpick at the beginning of the game. You get extra inventory space or whatever. And so yeah, this was one where I was like, there, I do not have a lockpick in there, so I'm like, okay, maybe this wasn't that game, or maybe they've changed that in the remake. I don't know, but playing through as Claire for my first playthrough, I made it down into the like I unlocked the pathway down into the catacombs or whatever it is outside of the police or like within the police station. I found the three medallions. I got to that point in the game, and that was kind of where I called it, and I just haven't gotten back to it yet. But yeah, I'm enjoying all the puzzle stuff. I'm definitely like worried that I'm using way too much ammunition, and I'm constantly like when I'm playing and I'm constantly like self-aware of it. Like I should not be trying to fight as many of these guys as I am. I should just like run away or just like leave them be. But like just it's ingrained in me that like oh if you see a zombie thing like shoot it in the head. And one of our friends Andrew who has done I don't remember the like Raccoon City Radio I think is the podcast he and Alex O'Neill do or have done with like Irrational Passions, where they play through and talk through the Resident Evil games. He was kind of giving me the pointer of like, yeah, no, like aim for the legs, take out their legs, and then like you could stab them with a knife after that or something like that, so you don't consume as much ammunition. And I was like, so like all of the media and video games and like all the rules of zombies of like you have to shoot them in the head is just lying to me. And he was like, yeah, pretty much for Resident Evil, yeah, that's the yeah, don't do that. And I was like, okay, well I've still been doing that. So, um, but yeah, like again the best way I can describe it I think is when I'm not terrified or like when the game isn't scaring the shit out of me, I'm really enjoying it. That said, like I have not encountered Mr. X yet, or the Tyrant, or whatever you want to call him. And Brandon Gann, friend of the show, kind of like teased it a little bit of like, hey, when you reach this point in the game, I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh, I already reached that point in the game. And I basically said like, yeah, the thing I'm really worried about at this point is when Mr. X shows up for the first time. He's like, he kind of like alluded, oh, he didn't show up, and I'm like, no, but I'm playing as Claire. I don't know if that like makes a difference. He's like, oh yeah, no, totally does. So I'm guessing if I had been playing as Leon when I got to a certain point in the game, that's when I would have been like bombarded for the first time with Mr. X. Instead, where it seems like Claire, maybe he's more of a random encounter kind of thing, and I just have not encountered him yet. There was one time I walked into a room and I saw what I thought was like big trench coated guy, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna regret this, but I'm gonna shoot him with like my grenade launcher or whatever. And then it just ended up being like a statue that was one of the puzzles that I needed to solve or something like that. But like from where from the vantage point I had, it looked like what I know Mr. X to look like. So I was like, all right, yeah. But yeah, I'm surprisingly enjoying that game. I don't know how much more time I'll get to spend with it before like Game of the Year stuff, but I'm glad I'm playing through it, and it's something I probably try and dedicate some more time to, especially if I don't get to it before the end of the year. It's something I'll probably play in the slow first couple months of 2020, before the deluge of stuff starts hitting in like February and March, and we start getting bombarded with all the like early 2020 Game of the Year contenders like Cyberpunk and Final Fantasy VII Remake and Last of Us and all that stuff. So yeah.
I think I think January is like a great time for Resident Evil. Like I guess like I know horror's so like a Halloween thing, but like that's
Hmm.
when I played Resident Evil 7 was like it was like January and there was like nothing to do and I was like this looks kind of fun and then like you just kind of get this like surprise, and like I think it's like a perfect time for something like Resident Evil.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the announcement of like Nemesis also coming out. I'm like, God, am I gonna also try and play like Resident Evil 3 next year? This is gonna be really weird. And I was realizing I have the first Resident Evil because it was like a PlayStation Plus game at some point, and
Yeah,
I go through and like collect those every time, even if I'm never gonna like play them. But it's like Resident Evil the original, like on PS4. So it's not like a super remastered kind of thing or remake like RE2 is, I don't think, but it is
I
like
think
the
it's
it's like the
uh
up-resed version of the original, I think.
I think it's
So,
the GameCube remake. Like I
okay.
think I think because it's like Resident Evil remake or whatever, and I think that's the one they've been porting to like all the HD consoles. I think that's like the version it is.
Yeah. So it's
But like
like
if anything, that's like the one you want probably.
yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, if I'm not gonna be scared and thrown off, because I can I can just like enjoy the disconnect between like the pixelated older design and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm blown away and surprised by the fact that I was enjoying Resident Evil as much as I was, as long as it's not scaring the crap out of me, which I'm sure it will continue to do. Like the first time I encountered a licker in that game, I was like, "Oh, fuck this thing in the face," um, and I very much was glad that I had like my grenade launcher like equipped and ready to go and just like take that thing out. I've encountered a couple of those now. I think I'm just like, "Yep, all of you guys can die." So yeah,
Uh,
that's my time with Resident Evil 2.
I'm curious, I'm curious from your perspective. Like, I know you're enjoying two, and you were even saying like I might even play three that's going to come out. Like, and we're probably going to get like eight at some point. I'm just curious, like from your perspective, what do you want to see in the future from the franchise? Like, do you want to see just like more remakes, or do you want to see like new stuff? Like, what could like do you think this could be something you might get into? Like, you might become a Resident Evil fan?
I don't know. I feel like from as the outsider looking in, like I feel like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 4, and the original are like the ones that everybody's like, oh my god, those are the ones you want to play. And then when they get into 5 and 6, they become like more action focused, which is like honestly like the action focused of 5 and 6 is probably what I would enjoy more, where it's less survival horror and it's more like yeah, kill these things. Um, because that like the tension that I'm having and that I'm facing with the game is like knowing that I'm limited in my inventory capacity and like okay, I don't know what's important, what I should keep or not keep at this point. Um, and then also the this always scrounging for ammo. I hate that feeling. Zyger hopped in the chat at some point while I was playing, and we kind of joked how 2019 has been like the year of the over encumbered games between between like Death Stranding, Outer Worlds, like that game mechanic I very much hate of like, okay, you can only carry a limited amount of things. Um,
But you kind of need all of this.
exactly. So as far as like what I would like from the series, I don't feel like I'm qualified at all to say. Um, the thing I like about it is the puzzles and kind of the like exploratory nature. I get like like we talked about it on Video Game List show. The Metroidvania elements of the game I'm really enjoying. The survival horror stuff much less so, just because that's never been my thing. I never play games to like be stressed. Games are my stress reliever, and so coming into something like Resident Evil or something like Sekiro, it very much is like I have to like prepare myself to be in that mindset of like, okay, this is going to be a tense, few hours experience. Um, and just kind of prep myself for that before like going and doing something else, as opposed to like a Borderlands thing where I can just be like, okay, yep, I'm just gonna go in and shoot everything. I'm gonna have plenty of ammunition. I'm not worried about any of that stuff. So as far as like what I would want from the series, I appreciate that like they're doing these remakes and they're making the remakes they're putting enough care and polish into the remakes to make them like a worthwhile investment to come back to these games that might not otherwise be as playable in 2019. But I'm always a fan of like no, like do new stuff. So if they do a Resident Evil 8, that's more in the vein of 7, which was another one that like kind of seemed to reinvigorate the series. It my understanding is kind of like Resident Evil kind of goes up and up and up, and then it like dips in 5 and 6, and like diehard Resident Evil fans don't like those, even though I think those are the ones that like have ended up selling the best. Outside of now, I think the remake of 2 has like outsold those other ones. But then like 7 came and it was like, okay, they're doing it in first person now, and it's a different perspective, and that's like making them rethink how the game is approached, and it's a game that was obviously very influenced by like the PT trailer and that kind of stuff. Um, so seeing them kind of like continue to evolve the franchise is certainly what I would like to see that from most developers is like innovate and do new stuff as opposed to going back to the like cash cow well. But that said, I already talked about like I'm very much looking forward to Final Fantasy VII next year, and that's again, it is a like they're putting enough polish and enough new meat on the bone for that one that it's not just another port of that game. Um, so yeah, yeah, like I said, I don't know if I'm at all qualified to say like here's what Resident Evil should be in the future, especially not after only like 2 or 2.5 hours of playing one of them. But yeah, I think I mean based on like I'm friends with blonde nerd Brittany Brombacher from What's Good Games, and she's I think she's the biggest Resident Evil fan I'm aware of, I know of, and she seems to be super on board with like all the things they're doing, where they're maybe they've got one team working on these remasters, remake kind of things, but then they're also working on like they just announced or teased or kind of like it came out that they're looking for like game testers for an unannounced title, in addition to like the RE3 that they're getting next year. So if that ends up being Resident Evil 8, that's more in the line of Resident Evil 7, I think that's going to be, what that section of the audience is looking for.
And I mean, honestly, that's like me, I guess, because like I appreciate the whole like the history of like the franchise and all the other games, and especially I like the remakes and like they're it's kind of that thing of like I guess it is a little bit of like cash cow, but it is also like they're at least putting the heart into it, and it's like this is like what we want to do, you know, like and I at least like that but what I like about seven a lot is I love the family and it is very Metroidvania where you're like exploring the house and unlocking new areas and you get the key to go to the next thing and you can get like strong weapons really early on if you do the right thing. And it's even the same thing that you mentioned that you like of like the limited inventory. I also really enjoy in seven where like you have to figure out what are you going to need and you have to go back and pick up things you left somewhere. I like all that, and I really do want to see that in like going forward. I kind of want to see like more first person, more stuff like that. You know?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how the Project Resistance or the co-op mode that's coming out that they announced that first and then I thought it was really cool when they did the state of play announcement basically saying and here's a first look at the single player campaign attached to Project Resistance or whatever and that's what ended up being the Resident Evil 3 remake. I thought that was a cool way of like introducing this thing that like people clearly much more want the RE3 remake than the co-op thing, but hopefully the people that buy the Resident Evil 3 remake will give the co-op a chance and maybe that's something that Capcom is doing that they can also capitalize on and kind of get another section of RE. Seems like that's getting a lot more care at least than the like really bad Umbrella Corps multiplayer thing a few years ago that I remember like being at the bottom of so many people's like game like biggest disappointment lists kind of thing. So hopefully they seem to be doing everything right in the last couple of years based on my perception as an outsider. They're doing it right by the fans and they're expanding and bringing in new fans by kind of innovating on the formula. So yeah,
The
that's
last
my
thing,
yeah. Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, I was gonna just kind of make a joke almost too, where I was like, the last thing I have to say is just bring back Dino Crisis.
Yeah, that's. I mean, they seem to they re-upped the trademark on that this week. So who knows? Maybe it will come back. Um, so yeah, what's new and nerdy with you, Frank? What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things I guess I kind of wanted to give an update on, if anyone listened to the episode a couple weeks ago, the fireside chat I did with Logan, I was just kind of getting into my adventure with Fallen Order, and I was maybe like 3 or 4 hours in, maybe like five, and now it's been a couple weeks, I guess, and I've already gone a little bit probably too hard on it, and I have the full platinum in it, just like you were talking about. Like I got the platinum and
Yep.
I probably there's no hour counter, so I did kind of lose track of time, but I feel like it took probably like 30 hours maybe. Like is that probably similar for like you?
Yeah, I think well we were talking a little bit before we started recording that like you hadn't done a lot of exploring off the beaten path as you were kind of doing the main story stuff. And so like if you're not doing that as you go, it is like a lot of backtracking. So yeah, that seems probably right. I feel like mine was probably somewhere in the 25-hour range, but it very much does become kind of a blur at like in the post story elements. So yeah, like 30 hours doesn't sound out of the ordinary for me,
I
especially depending on like the nooks and crannies that you like miss and need to go and find for some of those kind of like 100% area discovery trophies. Um, so yeah,
I feel like they definitely build it out like where they encourage you to go exploring and they obviously want you to find these things or at least want to encourage like the exploration to try to find interesting things or like so they're like the one I remember really well that I didn't find that I had to go back and get is like you jump on the rope and go to the platform you need that's clearly visible but what you have to do is like turn around and there's just a platform with like an echo on it
yeah,
and so like there's just like and I get they kind of like do that like this things to encourage the exploration but the kind of what I felt like for me would like why I didn't do it a lot while like originally going through the worlds is because like I felt like so especially early on until like later the game the traversal of trying to get through the worlds is just so not fun like I
yeah.
feel like they give you much more like mobility skills and you get better shortcuts and unlock shortcuts and it makes everything way easier but it's so just like a slog in the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things a lot of people kind of uh, complained about is like, why can't he grab onto these ropes? And it's like, oh, it's because you see later that the ropes are very much clearly designed around the like being able to pull stuff to you with the force mechanic and being able to pull the ropes to you instead of just having to like jump out into the narrow hitbox window of those ropes.
And like and then kind of like on the opposite end of that, there was like by the time you're at the end of the game and you're way stronger and you've unlocked a lot of things and you have like better skills in the skill tree, then I did feel way better. Like, and it's not necessarily perfect or like completely fixed, but it does feel so much better to like run around and explore. And when I would run into combat, I was so much stronger to just like fight dudes. Like it was fun. Like it's kind of that like becoming a Jedi experience almost, you know? Like
Yeah, absolutely.
I really do feel like the sense of progression in Fallen Order that I really enjoyed, honestly.
Yeah, I remember obviously the one of the big things that you encounter early on in that game is like one of those frog creatures on the first planet really. And
Ogdo
it's like
Bogdo, man.
yeah, and it's like okay, this thing sucks. I hate these things, and it's like it very much reminded me of from my like I was getting like PTSD flashbacks to my my time with Bloodborne, my 24-hour stream of Bloodborne, where I was like okay, like this is like the cleric beast where I don't have to do this right now. This is an optional thing, but it's like the first boss level kind of thing that you can encounter. And like, oh, it would have been way easier if I came back. And certainly, as you progress through that game, like you're saying, like those things get way easier to take out when you're doing more damage and when you have like when you can slow them down or kind of like use the different force abilities to do more damage and kind of like shift around your combat styles. But like when you encounter those things right up front, it's like okay, yeah, any of these dumb little things can kill me with one or two hits. That sucks and that's annoying. um, did you keep playing the game? Because we talked about it at some point. You were playing on kind of the what Jedi Master difficulty, basically hard. Did you kind of keep it there through your time with the game, or did you drop it down?
So I started off on hard or the like the whatever the hardest difficulty was, and when I got to Ogdo Bogdo, kind of like you were saying, I guess like I understood that like there was supposed to be exploration in this game, but for some reason I didn't. I kind of got lost on Bogano, and I thought that was like the main path because I was like, oh, I haven't been over here, and then I stumbled into this boss fight, and he was destroying me, and that's when I kind of like lowered it down to like either whatever would be like hard or normal, I guess. And I basically slammed my head against the wall for forever until I beat Ogdo Bago finally, and then I realized I picked up the Sense Echo, and then realized I had no reason to be in this cave.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I
because
remember.
I then
Yeah,
go ahead.
I know exactly the cave you're talking about because it is like that is the first one you can encounter is like off the beaten path, and yeah, like there's maybe a thing at, like behind it kind of thing, but yeah, you don't have to fight that at all. And then the first time you like would normally encounter it through the story is after you come out of that like first temple thing on that planet, and you'll like come down into the path of one, and it's like oh you it like I think it even like says like this thing's way too strong, don't fight it, just run or something like that. I think there's like a dialogue cue to clue you in on like, hey, you don't have to fight this thing. You can just like evade it and go about your business. Um, and so yeah, that was. But yeah, the first time, like I had seen enough people tweeting about like fuck the frog, where I was like, okay, I'm gonna not deal with this yet. I'll come back and deal with this thing later.
Like it's funny though that you mentioned that, like yeah, because then I had the exact same moment that you kind of like said there that like I guess like other people may have had too. Is like I slammed my head against this wall to beat Ogdo Bogdo. I finally did it, and then I go through figured out the main path, go through the rest of the thing, and then I get outside and I get jumped by like a knockoff version of Ogdo Bogdo that doesn't have a name. It's just like the creature,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh, this is this cool fight, right? And I was like, no, I already did this. Why are you making me do this again? And then
Yep.
I beat. I think I did actually just run away from him. I think I either beat him or I was like, I'm not doing this, and I just ran away. I ran away from that creature a lot every time I had to go back there.
Yep. Yeah,
Like I
that's the because one of the trophies is like pull like slice the tongue off of the thing, and that's the one I went at because I was like that I know that one spawns there, so that's the one I'm gonna go and like and get when I finally got that trophy.
same.
Um, but yeah, like other than that, like a lot of times I was just kind of like, all right, those are the big creatures. I'm gonna just avoid those guys. I don't feel like fighting them right now.
Man, but the other kind of annoying trophy was the one where you have to kick the Falak or whatever that kicks you.
I like once I learned or paid attention to like what you needed to do, because yeah, it's like kick the thing that has kicked you, I think is the trophy. Like first I was like, okay, I don't like I looked at the trophy, I was like, what? I don't even know what creature that is. So I went and like I went into the data banks or whatever to figure out, okay, where's that creature? Where am I gonna find that creature? What like where do I need to go to do this? And then when I got to one of them, I was just like, okay, let me like figure out what this guy like, because that was definitely a creature that I probably just went through and like would slash them like just left and right and whatever and kill them, and so I didn't have a good sense of like what's their move thing, how are they going to attack me. So it was a matter of like, okay, let's figure out how to get it to attack me, and then I was using the kick like attack a lot through the game because it was like it was a nice little like, oh, you take a sidestep and then you kick a guy to basically stun them. So I was using that on troopers all like for a good chunk of the game. So like I had a pretty good like I knew the timing of how to do that move, so that one wasn't too tough for me. But I can get if you weren't using that skill set, that yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a like trickier challenge.
Yeah, because like for me on my end, I wasn't using that particularly, and like kind of like you had mentioned with like the combat styles, like it is kind of varied, like how they can let you do just so many different things, and I would find like different ways to combine different powers, like all the way up until the end of the game. I felt like I was like discovering new things where I was like, oh, why didn't I know about this? Or like, why didn't I use not even know about it, but why didn't I figure out how I should have been like utilizing this? You know, like if you feel me that way.
Yeah, no, that was I encountered that at some point because I was like, I feel like I unlocked an ability to do this thing, but I don't know what that was. And it was like I had just been going through and upgrading my skills, but I wasn't like I was basically using like my square square triangle combo or something. Like I had my like this is what's been working for me, so that's the combo, that's the attack I'm set in my ways on, and I wasn't really like exploring the other options that you start unlocking throughout the game. And so that at some point, I basically just sat and like looked through the skill tree and was like, okay, like what is the like? Let me click the view video of how this attack is intended to be done, because that's another thing where like it won't. You'll upgrade the thing, but it won't. Like I remember with like God of War, it would like play the video on loop of like here's what this skill does. I feel like Jedi Fallen Order didn't do that, but it gave you a button prompt of like, hey, do you want to watch the video of what this attack does? And so I went in, and that was where I started like, oh, okay, I can do that skill, I can do this skill, and yeah, it was at that point that I started like varying up what some of my like attack styles would be, and like I started using more like, okay, if I'm running and I hit triangle or something, or if I'm running and I jump and hit triangle, I'll use like a big old power attack, and that started working wonders for me or something like that. So yeah, like changing up my like attack styles and plans. That said, I like and like we will I guess dive into a little bit of spoiler stuff. So if you don't want to know anything Jedi Fallen Order potential spoilery stuff, I'll go ahead and put a timestamp here in the episode. But like for me personally, I almost exclusively was using like the single bladed lightsaber. How about
Mm-hmm.
you? Did you switch and do any of the double bladed stuff?
Yeah, actually, it's funny because I mostly used the double-bladed lightsaber because I once I got it, I really loved just how it performed, and especially when you get the ability where you can break it in half and do that like that swipe, like that's so overpowered. It destroys everything in its path,
Yeah,
and
I
like
mean the single bladed has a similar thing where it basically because it's you have two lightsabers basically at that point that you're just connecting to get the double bladed. And so it's like I definitely use that power as well. But for me, the like when I unlocked the double bladed, it was just like okay, like it's cool, it's a little bit faster, but it doesn't do as much damage. And where I was at in the game, I was like, I just need to be killing these guys in like 3 hits and not try and wait for 6 hits. So I kept to the single bladed for a good portion of the game and just didn't like alter the stances or whatever. That's
It,
interesting that you kind of more prioritize the double bladed.
I thought it was like when as soon as I got it, like I was doing better in combat and I felt like more powerful or just like it just like flowed for me, I guess. But I didn't realize until like I was talking to people or like hearing about it after the fact that like yeah, like oh, double bladed is like lower damage, more like crowd control, and single bladed is like when you're going for like heavy damage. And I was like, oh, I kind of like didn't understand that. Like I was always in like the crowd control moments because they throw you against so many stormtroopers so many times like
Yeah.
and then when I was fighting just like animals it kind of like doesn't matter I guess so I was still kind of able to get through but that also explains like I do think like in hindsight I'm like that explains why some of these moments like were kind of tough and like even like where I was like Jesus this is like hard like but I
Hmm.
was like oh like doing double bladed against like that one night sister on Kashyyyk like yeah it's hard.
Yeah. Um.
But then
Uh.
she does the double blade, and I was like, oh, okay, so we're gonna do double blade fight, like.
Yeah. That's fair. Um. What was I gonna ask you? Um. Oh, when did you unlock the double bladed lightsaber?
That was when I was on Kashyyyk. Like I basically roped up to like I either got dropped off by I think I got dropped off on like the top of the tree,
Hmm.
and then there's like a lightsaber thing like right there. Like, do you remember the part I'm talking about? Like,
Yeah. So that's the yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask because that is the like that's the story progression, like that's where you unlock it if you just play through the story. I unlocked it on Dathomir before I even got to Kashyyyk, because there was a thing that Mitch Dyer, formerly of IGN, and wrote the he was one of the people who wrote the story campaign for Battlefront 2. He tweeted out basically like a vague kind of thing of like, hey, when you can go and explore Dathomir, you're not going to be strong enough, but you can like avoid enemies and you can kind of run around. But just go and explore and until you find a thing, you'll know what I'm talking about, kind of thing. And so like I was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll see what he's doing. Is it gonna be like a tease of Darth Maul or whatever from like Clone Wars? I was curious, and so it's another like Jedi workbench kind of thing, like lightsaber workbench that you find there. And if you do that, and there's also one on Zeppo, I think. There's basically like two other workbenches that you can unlock it on before that one in Kashyyyk. But if you haven't unlocked it, like you will unlock it there on Kashyyyk. And so I unlocked it there very early on, and I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of a like anticlimactic versus what I imagine you encounter, where it was like you had just done this magnificent like flight over Kashyyyk on this giant bird creature thing, and it drops you off, and it drops you off right there into like, oh, and now you also get a double-bladed lightsaber. Cool. So it's like like that's one of the things with that game. I'm just like, that's a weird design choice to let the moments be that varied. Because yeah, for me it just felt like that's a weird way to like deliver this upgrade. Um, and it wasn't until I read kind of like when you can get it in the normal story mode where I was like, oh yeah, that seems like it would have been way more dramatic if I'd gotten it there. So
and then I think it is, and especially like based on like our conversation here, I can definitely even realize that a little bit because I didn't like I thought that's just where you get it because I had heard like oh this is anticlimactic like that's like one of the only things I had spoiled for me was like there is a double blade and when you get it it's like anticlimactic you just get it.
yeah,
And so even in that moment though, when I got it, I was just like, oh, this is the moment where you just get it, and this is what everybody's talking about. And I was like, yeah, I can see what everybody's talking about. Like you just kind of walk up and get it from this workbench. But then it's funny how like talking about it with you, I'm like, oh, I actually kind of get it now. It was a bigger moment where you like beat this thing and like soar to the top of this tree, and it's kind of like this. It's like a moment.
yeah. It's like it that moment stands out to me from that game as like one of the like big set pieces where it's like you've beat this boss and now you are just kind of like you're rewarded with this flight over the environment on this majestic giant creature kind of thing. And there aren't a ton of those kinds of moments in the game. Like the game is not littered with those things. So like that being one of the few that I can think of, the fact that like you will also potentially get your double-bladed lightsaber kind of tied closely to that moment is like, oh, that's an interesting 1-2 punch of like, okay, you did this thing, you got this like beautiful cinematic, and then you got this new gameplay mechanic thing that you can go and explore with in combat. Versus, oh, I like ran away from a lot of spiders and night brothers and stuff to find this little workbench in a cave, and suddenly had a double-bladed lightsaber with no pomp and circumstance. It was just like that. So like that's the really underwhelming thing where it's like you just okay, why like, and it's like why is it those workbenches when you can go to other workbenches and like customize your lightsaber and stuff and change the emitter, and that was like because you get the same kind of extended like he builds it out kind of thing. So like as I was doing, I was like, oh, this must be I must be getting a double-bladed lightsaber. I don't even know how I knew I was getting a double-bladed lightsaber because I don't remember if that had been spoiled for me. But I was just like, oh, that's probably a thing you'll get in this game. Um, and so yeah, I was like, I got it, and I was like, okay, that's what Mitch was telling me to go there for. Okay, I guess that's like okay, cool, fine. And then yeah, I used it a little bit and saw immediately that it was doing less damage. And I was like, okay, well I don't want that, so I switched it back to the single bladed.
And like, it's funny, yeah. Like, I think it's really funny, I guess, like talking about it and kind of hearing the differences there, because yeah, like it is like this, like, oh, it's like you fly up, and it is this like this moment, and I was like you said, that doesn't happen often, and I was like surprised. I was like, oh, again, like there's a thing I was like, I didn't expect this, and it's like it's an interesting like moment of tranquility in like some of these other moments that are like way more just like fights and like just like being stormtroopers constantly shooting at you from like random places and stuff like and I can see kind of the thing of like you beat this like boss and now you're kind of like upgrading and becoming more of like a Jedi and kind of getting that, whereas like we were saying, like you had to go like through an actual nightmare. Like Dathomir is like the nightmare world where it's like red and like the sky is like bleeding, like and you're just like avoiding spiders and Darth Maul villains.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a like I'm glad you ended up enjoying the game and or not that you weren't enjoying the game initially, but I'm glad you got through it and you pushed through and you got the platinum. We talked a little bit before we started recording about the kind of the end of that game. Do you want to dive into that a little bit and talk about kind of how that felt? Again, we're already in spoiler territory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is like, man, I just like so you get to the end of the game and you kind of like if for people who have played it, I guess like you just kind of like storm that like Imperial facility and you're like, they have the thing we need, we're gonna take it back, like we need to get in there. And I like you end up fighting like one of those Night Sisters, and like I loved those fights, and like that was really fun. And I just like, man, that moment where you just get your fight gets like interrupted, and all you do is you just hear that like ventilated breathing, and Vader shows up. Like, oh my god, dude, that's so amazing. Like, I
Yeah,
was so taken aback by that. Like,
yeah, it was a really cool moment, and like we talked a little bit that there was like controversy around Thanksgiving. There was an ad that went out that basically had like the breathing and a shot of Vader, and people were like, "This ruins the end of the game." And my argument is like, no, it doesn't ruin the end of the game. It only ruins the end of the game if you already know the end of the game. If you already know that that is at the end of this game, like that's the only way you're gonna get that it ruins that moment, quote unquote. Because otherwise it's just like okay, like yeah, it's Vader. Like your main enemies in this game are the Night Sisters, which are like Sith Inquisitors that Vader was overseeing. So it makes sense that hey, if they're not doing their job, if they're not capturing you and killing you like they're supposed to, Vader might want to step in at some point. So it's like okay, yeah, like the parallel that I kind of alluded to when we were talking about it before we sat down and started recording was like they used shots of Vader in the Rogue One trailer, teasing that he's in that movie, and they used shots of Vader back in early teaser stuff for Star Wars Rebels, which basically anything that's taking place in between episodes 3 and episodes 4 of Star Wars, it's like Vader is a presence in that universe. So it makes sense that you could try and use him. And from a marketing stance, yeah, you're going to want to sell that iconic character and say like, "Hey, like yeah, these other people who are in this game and the people you're playing as, you don't know them, but you will. But you know Vader. You remember this breathing guy. He's iconic. So of course you're going to use that to try and sell your game. But yeah, it's still a very great moment, and it is like the thing I like about that is like you are, it is very apparent like, oh, Vader is going to fuck you up. You're not supposed to fight Vader. You are supposed to run away from Vader. Like the perspective changes and stuff, and it's like, okay, yep, you are clearly supposed to get out of here, and he just it is him. It's like the end of Rogue One, where it's like he's just gonna follow you and try and kill you, and so it turns into like the platforming escape kind of thing to get out of there. Um, and like I watched some kind of like a compilation clip of like somebody trying to do anything to turn like attack and harm Vader. Like, um, if you if like when it gives you control again or something, and you you're facing away from Vader. If you turn and face towards Vader, he just automatically starts choking you. And like, but this guy tried like to do he threw his lightsaber behind him without looking at Vader, see if that did anything. It's like, nope, that didn't do anything. And with if enough time passes, he just gets on you and force chokes you and kills you anyway. So it's like, yep, you were. There's no way for you to do any damage against Vader. You were just supposed to get out of there. And it was an interesting like way to end that game, I thought.
No, and I did like that because like I was really like it's like you said, like yeah, like totally, like there's these Sith Inquisitors and he's all around in this universe and he's one of the biggest characters and like one of the strongest kind of, so like I definitely like him most popular, so it makes sense that he'd be here. And I was just not thinking of it that way though, like that just wasn't even on my radar. Like I really thought the Night Sisters were going to be like the focus, and I thought you were going to fight more of Night Sisters than we got. Like I don't know all of the canon behind the Night Sisters, and I'm assuming, I guess, the other Night Sisters probably already have like canon deaths or stories or something tied to them. So maybe there's only like limited things we can work with.
Yeah, I
But
think
like,
some of them do, like because I feel like they get introduced in, if not Clone Wars.
I believe it was Clone Wars from what I
No,
heard.
no, because they're not in Clone Wars because the Empire hasn't taken over in Clone Wars. But they're in
Oh,
Rebels,
yeah,
and
right.
like
Yeah, you're right.
in Rebels, like the in one of the early seasons of Rebels, like there's like the head Inquisitor, and then there's like the second sister, fourth sister, ninth sister. I don't remember which one's which, but like Sarah Michelle Gellar basically voices one of them, and she's kind of like the big bad for one of the seasons of Rebels. So yeah, like and it's because there's sisters and brothers. So they're not all like female characters. So some of them I believe do have like, yep, this is what happened to that character. They're done, but they have enough of them that are like out there still in the like, oh, we know how many there are, we know the names of them maybe, but the game getting to explore like a couple of them here, I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely like that aspects because not only were like those some of my favorite moments with the fights, like everything with Trilla, I was really into, and I just like what they're like going into the backstories of how it's like how these people kind of came to be that way, and like I forget the other Night Sister you fight besides Trilla, which one that was, but I also thought it was cool that she's like missing a leg, and like I think she just says like yeah, they basically like took her leg because they try to just like they're forcing these people into the dark side, so they're just like torturing them. And like I just think that's like amazing. Like I was like really interested in all that, especially because this is something that me personally like I just wasn't aware of this. Like I haven't seen Rebels, so like I wasn't aware of this like being a thing already. And like I was really interested in it. And I remember there's a moment really early on, like when you first meet the sisters, and they're like one of the brothers is there, I believe,
Yeah,
and thought we were gonna get some of the brothers too. Like I thought this game was gonna be about like hunting or being hunted by and just fighting Night Sisters and like brothers, and like not all of them necessarily, but I thought there was gonna be more than just like what we got. But I'm assuming, like I said, like I'm assuming some of them already have like canon stories and endings that they can't really mess with, and then I'm assuming they probably want to save more for like Fallen Order 2 or Jedi, whatever, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my complaints with the game was, which you can read my review on that nerdy site. I for like these games, these kinds of games, these Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Sekiro types of games are like so like known for their boss fights, and I felt like the boss fights in Jedi Fallen Order were largely underwhelming. You've got like a couple of those with the Second Sisters, and then you've got like a couple giant creatures that you fight, but it's really like in Bloodborne, for example, in my 24 hours with Bloodborne, I fought through and killed 6 monsters, but I know that that was even that was only like scratching the surface of the bosses in that game. So the fact that I feel like I can only think of and name, or like I can only visualize like 4 things that you really like significantly fight in this game. I thought that was a little underwhelming, and so I hope that that's something that they explore later on. Even the like on that on was it Zeppo or Jaffa or whatever. Like on the first planet you go to and fight the Ongo Bongo or whatever it was, the the frog creature. There's like this giant dragon thing that's like off on the side, and I was like I remember seeing that when I was first on that planet. I was like, oh, that's gonna be like a boss that I'm gonna kill way later down. And it's like, no, you just never like that thing is always out of reach. You don't that's
Yeah,
not a
you can't
thing you
even get
fight in
there.
the game. And I was like, that's like so why have that like that seemed like it was designed to be a boss fight and then maybe they ran out of time to make it something. But like that so that's like cuz I was just like that why would you have such a giant beast like that in here and not make that an enemy that you have to fight?
I totally agree with that because, like, yeah, I didn't notice it the first time, and it might not have even been there because sometimes when you go to Bogano, it's just like not there. But
Yeah.
like, when I went back and was like exploring, I was like, oh my God, there's like this dude over here, and I had way more traversal at that point, kind of like we were talking about before, and I thought like, oh, I can get over there now.
Yep.
And then I'm like, oh no, you don't. Like that's just nothing. And I was like, I had kind of the same thing for me where I was like, why is this even here? Like I thought this was like that. It should be the Ogdobago fight. That is the Bogano fight. You should go back and like, oh, and I kind of even get why. Like I feel like that is probably was something that was cut because I feel like that Bogano is the perfect place to put like some secret like end game like boss almost type thing where you go back to the planet you first go to when you nothing and you can't even traverse and you're fighting like an end game boss. Like
Yeah.
you follow me there?
Yeah, like when you go back at the end of that game to try and find the holocron thing there, like it seems like that would have been a perfect time to be like, okay, well now you're ready to fight this thing, so we're gonna make you fight it as like a final big bad or something like that. And then yeah, you just didn't.
And I wouldn't have even minded if like the first time you go there, like it could have even been possibly like a thing where you know, like, oh, the holocron's here, and then that is like what's stopping you. Like it's like some guardian of the holocron, maybe.
Yep.
And then like you have to just go do the whole game and then be just get strong enough to come back and fight it. Like I would even be cool with that. Like,
Yep. And that's not what they were making. So yeah,
yeah.
we'll see if they how they expand on that because I got to imagine with based on like reception and I imagine sales have been really well on that that EA is gonna EA is not gonna like take this one successful Star Wars thing that they've made in the last 6 years of their deal and not follow up on it. So, um,
I
cool.
know we've been talking about Fallen Order for a bit, so I do want to wrap it up, but I just have two questions I'm kind of curious from your perspective on this for
Yep.
kind of similar to what I was saying about Resident Evil, like Fallen Order 2, I believe they're already probably going to be working on it, and I'm excited for it personally. Are you on board? Like, are you on board for Jedi, whatever, Fallen Order 2? Like,
Yeah, I very much so. I really enjoyed the Fallen Order combat and I really enjoyed the characters too. The my favorite character in that game I think is actually Marin,
yeah,
the Night Sister that you encounter on Dathomir. Um, like as and so the night we're recording this, like last night, Chloe Naylor, who's diehard Grievous fan number one, she tweeted out basically like her realization that Marin is like a survivor of General Grievous going and killing like all of her sisters, which is alluded to, and it like is basically explicitly stated in some of the databank stuff. And she was like, "Oh, this is now my game of the year because it references Grievous," and like and very much like like points to stuff that Grievous did in the Clone Wars TV show. And so like I remember like that story unfolding and knowing that not to the extent that Chloe does, but knowing that like that when Darth Maul kind of like showed back up on that planet and stuff, that they're like that pretty much all the Night Sisters get wiped out. So like even encountering her at the beginning of that thing, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'm curious like how this is going to play out and what's going to happen. And I thought somehow that the guy that you fight on that planet was going to somehow like be Maul like or something like that. He was like Maul in disguise or something. Doesn't end up doing that, um, but so in terms of like what I want to see kind of from another game, or if I'm on board and stuff, I'm definitely on board, and I just kind of want to see them continue to like explore the dynamics of those characters, um, specifically because I think that's something they didn't really do all that much. We talked about it in a previous episode of like you're not going out and like chatting with these companions outside of like, oh, they'll be outside your ship and you can like have a canned conversation with them or something like that. Um, I would very much be interested in seeing like more of their interplay.
Mm.
Especially because I just think she was a fascinating character, and the fact that she kind of becomes your ally by the end was a really cool dynamic for that.
I I did really like her as well, and I was definitely a fan. Like, I wish we could have possibly like recruited more people. That was something I kind of talked about, like my love for like Mass Effect 2 and like putting together Suicide Mission and like getting a squad together. Like, I uh I definitely love like that aspect of games and just especially Mass Effect 2. And I get that's not what they were necessarily going for, but that's why I also like I did really like her. She probably also was like my favorite character too. And I definitely enjoyed like being able to add her in, and I would have been cool. Like I would like to see like more with her possibly, and like even just like even doing cool like combat stuff or like magic or whatever like that.
Yep.
Um, so that kind of almost goes into what my follow up was going to be, is because I was wondering, like you said, you like the characters in this hypothet or like in this sequel. Do you want more Cal in these characters, or do you want just like Jedi whoever and just let's pick someone else and let's just do another story in a different part of the galaxy? Like, do
Um,
you see like what if it just hops Jedi stories? Like,
I would be interested in seeing because I like you run the risk during this era of introducing too many Jedi's into the like that survive the purge, because then they it like everyone you add makes Obi-Wan a little less special. And so you have something like Rebels, which is centered around a couple of Jedi characters existing in that kind of space, in Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger, that kind of go through it like they have a similar story a little bit of like they survived the purge like Cal does here, and then they kind of got to keep themselves under wraps. They got to stay in hiding, but they very quickly become exposed, and so there are very specific segments of the Imperial Army that are like seeking out these guys because they know that they're Jedi. They know they have lightsabers. They know that they survived the purge. So you got to try and like stamp them out. And that's where again the second sister and the Night Sister, or the Inquisitorial Squad, because I think we've interused those terms, because the Night Sisters are like Marin and the people of Dathomir, and then the second sister and the Inquisitors are
yeah.
are the those are basically Darth Vader's like squad to hunt down the Jedi that survived. Not everyone got killed by the clones, and so like they are like Sith sensitive kind of people that are out there trained and ready to hunt down any surviving Jedi. So I don't think you can have too many out there. So I'm perfectly fine continuing to just follow Cal's story here. If his story somehow like crossed paths with something like Rebels, which happens around the same kind of time frame, I think that would be very cool. Because I think that's an interesting cast of characters, and I'm always I would love to see Star Wars in this like unified canon like bounce between mediums, and so like, oh, you've got these characters from the TV show that are gonna now make an appearance as not the central focus of this game, but Cal might cross paths with him in the same way that like we saw Saw Gerrera in this game. Saw is a character that was introduced in the Clone Wars and then also is in Rebels, and then showed up in Rogue One. And so like more of that I would love to see. I would love to see kind of taking other characters from this universe and like putting them in here as like a hey, if you're like super in the know, like you'll know who this is. If not, it's just another interesting character that these guys are encountering. So yeah, and I think they will keep it with Cal. I think they'll continue like that will still be your central cast of the next game, as they go on and do some other quest. Um, yeah, but
I
they
I
might encounter a handful of other people on their journey.
when I was like when I had kind of like finished or playing was playing and I was thinking like I definitely want more. I was kind of like wondering like I kind of like Cal didn't like blow me away. Like no offense to the actor or the writing or anything. It's just like no, a lot of the characters just like they're like nothing kind of like blew me away. So I don't necessarily particularly like want like more of them specifically for me.
Yeah,
And I was thinking it would be interesting to just kind of have this series of like Jedi where it just kind of goes between Jedi and just tells like Jedi tales basically. But what's interesting, what I think with like you where you're kind of where your head was at is like, okay, well we're gonna stick with like this universe, we're gonna be post purge in like this timeline, where I immediately was like, well we would just go pre purge and we're just gonna tell Jedi stories.
okay,
So like that's where like I was even like that was where my first thought was is like we could go pre-purge, and I think it'd be interesting to see some stories where like the Jedi were actually kind of like in power or like not just like completely dismantled and kind of like after the purge, after Order like 66.
yeah, like
Um
maybe a during the Clone Wars era kind of thing, or even before Episode One. Yeah,
or
it'd be
God,
interesting.
could you even imagine going into like they would never do this, but could you even imagine if they took like the KOTOR universe and then they just put like a Jedi game like this in that universe? Like
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
yeah, like these are things they would probably never do, and I'm with you that I think they're just going to continue with Cal, and we'll get. I think it's going to be Jedi colon something, and it'll just be Cal again. But like, you got me more excited for more Cal with like what you're saying of like continuing to do like an MCU thing and just go multi-medium and like have everything kind of like come together into like one property, you know?
Yeah,
And like I got excited when I saw and like yeah, like and so seeing like these characters interact and like I said I haven't seen Rebels, but like I would be really interested to see Cal, who's this like I'm completely alone in the universe, run into more Jedi's who are like, oh, we're Jedi's too, like even like I'd love to see that, like.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
I think it's got. I think there's potential out there, depending on how far they want to go with it, and it's you know we see Saw kind of make that crossover in this game, and maybe they can kind of. I think going into this, they didn't know how response was going to be on this. I think this was a big, especially given how like Battlefront 2 had performed and all that stuff, and all the backlash that they'd gotten from that EA has gotten for the last 5 years. Um, like they were still trying to make a good one, and Respawn, pitched it. Obviously, you had the Amy Hennig game that never got off the ground. So like I I think Cal is by design, more silent protagonist than anything. But like that being said, like I love him in BB-8, or not BB-8, BD-1. I love like their little back and forth and their interplay, and like Cal also suffers from that story trope of like he's blocked out his past, and so you have to like slowly learn things back up. Now that he is like powered and like has remembered who he was, he could be potentially more interesting in the future. Um, it'll be interesting to see where they go with it. And maybe they can make him figure out a way to make him a more engaging and dynamic character. Because the problem with like so many Jedi is like the tenets of the Jedi Order basically insist that they be boring characters, unless they are like a rebel Jedi, like Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon or Anakin were, in that prequel era. But like they're they're kind of designed to be the the straight-laced people, while the Sith are the ones that are going out there and being like power hungry and crazy and stuff. So it's it's interesting to try and figure out a way to make that an engaging character, and something I that I don't know necessarily how to do. Like even the beginning of the game, like I loved his back and forth with his friend before he like is revealed to be the Jedi or whatever. Like I liked the banter that they were having. So maybe that's just something you needed more of. Is like you're not getting a lot of Cal's character because so much of that game is just him going off and fighting things alone. So maybe it is you just need more of him with other people to help flesh him out and make him more engaging.
And I can definitely like agree with that, or even like see that, because like you said, like some of the like a lot of the conversations you do have, like these pre-canned, just like I'm gonna get locked into standing in place and you're gonna talk like, and then I'm gonna like he just like gives his responses, and like it's not like I don't know, I just like I never wanted to stand there and just like listen to whatever they were saying, like I just feel like I guess it wasn't this like with like we were saying, it was him and his friend, and it's like, oh, we've worked together for years on this barge and we have like banter, and I feel like I just never got that from like some of the him and the other characters.
Yep. Yep.
I did like though when they sometimes like just talk about like backstory, or like, hey, talk about like this or whatever, when they're just like jumping from like planet to planet, like
Yep.
some of that stuff was like a little bit more like fun though.
Yep. The little like loading screen dialogue stuff. Um,
Yeah.
well, we gotta sit down and record our Star Wars spoiler cast here shortly. So I'm gonna go ahead and actually kind of call it there for this week's episode. I think we did a nice little deep dive into Resident Evil and Jedi Fallen Order. So we didn't have too much else on our respective plates to dive into. So that's gonna do it for this week's episode. Thank you again, Frank, for joining me. Sorry we weren't able to get Jazz on or any of the other crew. Everybody's busy as we're about to go into the holidays. So, yeah, let's just kind of go around the table. Anything you got to plug? You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes on Twitter. Anything you want to shout out?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I should shout out is that up on our YouTube channel, there is currently a Ultimate Chicken Horse Let's Play. It's kind of a breakout from our Extra Life launch live stream. I did some editing on that, and I like if anyone wants to go check that out. I think it came together pretty good.
Yeah.
There's some fun hidden like Easter eggs, I guess you would call them, maybe like laced in there.
Cool. Yeah. You can follow me at Trevor J Starkey. I reviewed Rise of Skywalker on our site, so go check that out. Uh, Cameron reviewed Death Stranding, and that was a long, laborious process of me going back and forth with him on some edits to get him in a place where I was good with that going up on the site. So check that out. I really like how that turned out for him. And yeah, I'm going to be on this week's episode of That Wannabe Film Class talking about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, so check that out too. And if you want more from Frank and I talking video games, you can always go listen to That Ultimate Video Game List Show Season 1 as we wind down. We are now into the top 10 ranking, so got 2 more
It's getting
episodes to
heated.
go. It is, and yeah, this last episode of 15 through 11 was super heated. Not from us so much as like Logan and Cameron just went at it for a good half hour at the beginning of that episode. But yeah, you can certainly check that out as well. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. Check out thatnerdysite.com for the latest content. And yeah, that's gonna do it. So if you liked what you heard, again, please rate, review, like, subscribe. Maybe even consider supporting us over on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of this show. If you are joining us in December, the early access episode from November is still out there. It was Frank, myself, and Cameron talking about Thanksgiving memories. I imagine here in the next week or so, we'll sit down and record a Christmas memories follow up for our December exclusive or something like that. Maybe best holiday gifts or something like that. But we will sit down and record that one soon. So thank you again for listening. Thank you again, Frank, for joining me. And as always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.